This is a presentation of the University of Wisconsin Parkside.
Thank you, Dr. Kindis. Thank you all. Welcome to Parkside, the center of the universe. And in some cultures, the center of the universe is considered to be where you are at any particular time. So I say that very sincerely. We are now at the center of the universe, delighted to be here. We've got chocolate, we've got discussion, we've got thinking about terms like globalism and world trade and free trade and fair trade. So I think in the next hour or so we'll tease out some of those concepts. And as I said, we'll enjoy a little chocolate at the same time. Now, if you think about the word globalism, it's really changed in the last 50 years. If you think back at the end of World War II, the Marshall Plan, which was our plan to economically reestablish our enemies in Europe, in Germany in particular, that plan, that Marshall Plan, was really the first global economic development plan. And the interesting thing about the Marshall Plan was it was almost unanimously supported in the United States. We had a consensus among all the citizenry, all the voters, all the taxpayers in particular, who were funding this, that global trade was a good thing. So if you'd ask someone, is globalism a good thing in the late 1940s, early 1950s, they would say absolutely. And when you think about it, it was really a transformative sort of concept. In the old days, of course, you'd vanquish your enemies, and you'd beat them in battle, and then you'd economically destroy them. So here we were saying what we need to do is rebuild Europe, rebuild Japan, and globalism, the global economy was the way we were going to do it. Fast forward 50 years to the Seattle protests, where all of a sudden globalism has a whole new meaning, and maybe a negative one, maybe a seriously negative meaning. And globalism today is almost shorthand for the exploitation of developing economies by multinational corporations. And if you look at the 100 largest economies in the world, more than half of them are actually corporations and not countries. So what we see is slowly over time, corporations and multinationals almost displacing countries as the agents of change and maybe the agents of social organization. It has interesting implications for the UN, which is built on nation states as being members. Wouldn't it be interesting if the UN actually had some of those top 50 corporations sitting around the table? Just some food for thought. We're going to talk today about moving up the value chain. We're going to talk about chocolate. And I want to tease you with some concepts to think about. We're going to open this up for questions, and I really invite a very robust discussion. But some of the things we may want to think about is discerning competitive advantage. Because the key for a lot of emerging democracies, and as I'll show you, Ghana in particular, was trying to discern what the competitive advantage really was. What could we be doing in Ghana that was better than anyone else in the world could do? As an example, if I'd ask you where good chocolate comes from, any ideas? Where does a good chocolate bar come from? Switzerland, France, Belgium, all make great chocolate. If I were to ask you, how many cocoa trees grow in Zurich? The answer would be 0. So for some reason, Europe had some competitive advantage, perhaps in the manufacturing or the product design for making chocolate and producing chocolate. But interestingly, they have no competitive advantage. You can't even grow a cocoa tree, which is the starting point for a chocolate bar. You can't even grow a cocoa tree in Europe. Okay? We'll talk about scalability. There's a lot of good ideas in the development world. The problem often is, how do you grow them? How do you scale them up? The benefits of free trade versus fair trade, are they at opposite ends of the spectrum? Are there areas of nuance that were worth exploring? I think so. Ideas of certification. Finance. When I first got into this world of sort of developing economies, it seemed like there were two kinds of finance. You could either do huge public works projects that were often tens of billions of dollars through the World Bank, or at the other end of the spectrum, you had the Grameen Bank microfinance loans, $10, $50, for example. How do you get a business going that's more than $50 but less than $5 billion? because that's really the meat of the market, and that's where most entrepreneurs are going to want to start. Inertia, we have what I call the development industry. A lot of very well-meaning and good people interested in economic development. One of the problems, as I see it, they're often in huge bureaucracies. And there's a need in a huge bureaucracy if you've got public money going into it for oversight, what we call transparency and accountability for that money. And if you spend $1 million, for example, on a project, you may find that $500,000 goes into oversight and traceability and transparency, and maybe only half that money ever gets to the project itself. An entrepreneurial approach, on the other hand, you may change 2 weeks into the project and say, you know something, we learned something from a mistake, we're going to go to the left instead of the right, and we're going to spend the money there. And you don't have that kind of accountability and transparency in an entrepreneurial venture, but you may have a higher likelihood of good results. So we'll discuss that. Also, a huge cross-cultural component to what I do. That's why I got into this business. I happen to love being in Ghana. In Ghana in particular, not even just West Africa. My experience in West Africa is limited. My experience in Ghana is quite deep, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I do what I do because it's really an excuse to go to a part of the world and a country for which I have great affection, the country of Ghana. And finally, understanding why you're there. For a lot of people that want to do development work, understand what it is you're doing. Are you trying to benefit yourself? Are you trying to benefit indigenous economies? How do you balance those things? Some countries may not want your help or the kind of help you intend to give. So you have to be quite flexible in trying to tailor what it is you're going to do for the country or the economy you ostensibly are out to help. So this is our vision, to create a true and authentic world-class food culture that showcases the natural resources and human talent of Africa. This is more than about making chocolate. And the way we achieve our vision is through an innovation model. We're really trying to move Ghana from the sale of cocoa beans so it can participate in what I call the branded high-value culinary and hospitality assets, which include finished chocolate. They include cafes. They include restaurants. They include hotels. They include destination venue type restaurants. Starbucks, Hard Rock cafes, that sort of thing. And interesting, in Ghana, cocoa accounts for almost half the revenues in the country in any given year. Almost 50% of the revenue comes from farmers growing cocoa and the sale of raw cocoa beans abroad. Almost none of that is from processed cocoa. Very small, single-digit percentage. When I came to Ghana, that's what I saw was the problem. You're selling cocoa beans for pennies a pound. You grow the finest cocoa beans in the world. Interestingly, when you trade cocoa futures, if you're in New York or London, the benchmark ton is called an Ivory Coast ton. That's how they measure it. Ivory Coast grows the most tonnage of cocoa in the world. Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. But if you want a ton of Ghanaian beans, they often trade several $100s more. It's considered a premium bean. And yet, the economy in Ghana is relatively depressed when I started 19 years ago. I mean, it is a relatively poor country. So you grow ostensibly the finest beans in the world. You're the world's second largest supply of beans, and yet you still can't get away from this commodity price pressure that besets a cocoa farmer. You can work hard all year long, but if Brazil oversupplies or there's a drought in Malaysia, the world price of cocoa varies greatly. We'll look at that, and you may be out of luck. So we wanted to move up the value chain to process goods and begin to put chocolate factories, which had been located in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and Zurich, Switzerland. We wanted to put them, I thought, a competitive advantage right in Ghana. And why is that? Well, my competitors have to take their cocoa beans. They bring them to port. They fumigate them. They put them in the hold of a ship. They subject them to a 4 to 6 week ocean voyage till they get to, let's say, Switzerland. And there in Switzerland, they're processed into finished chocolate. Those beans lose a lot of their magic. What we do at Omanhene is go from cocoa farm to factory, which is located a short distance from where these magical beans are grown. And in a period of maybe 4 weeks, we go from raw bean to finished chocolate bar. And we'll talk about some areas of competitive advantage, what that means, what do we do in the United States. The short answer is we print our labels here because there's some FDA ink rules and a quality of packaging that they can't do in Ghana. So we do certain things in southeastern Wisconsin that we can do better than anyone else in the world. The printing industry here is really legendary. And we ship that packaging to Ghana. We put it through our factory, and the finished chocolate comes back here for sale. Okay, so we're moving up the value chain. The history of the company, I started this in 1991. It took 4 years to make my first chocolate bar. I sold the first chocolate bar in late 1994 in New York at the Fancy Food Show, and we're credited with doing 3 firsts. The first single origin chocolate bar. Before Omanhene, if you bought a chocolate bar, if you had a Hershey bar, a Nestle's bar, the cocoa beans that were in that bar could have been from a dozen different countries. Most companies had a rather generous flavor profile and a rather tight economic one. So if they could get cheaper beans from Cote d'Ivoire this week, or beans came from Malaysia the following week that were cheaper, they'd cobble those beans together within a flavor profile, and you'd make a chocolate bar. So your cocoa beans that came in your particular chocolate bar may be from many, many countries. I thought chocolate should be like a single malt whiskey. We're going to showcase a particular bean from a particular country, and like an estate bottled wine or a single malt whiskey that's made right at the distillery, we did the first single origin chocolate bar. And today you can find other chocolate bars that feature beans from, say, Venezuela or some from Ghana, but they're not produced in those countries. Those people are still taking the beans, like the multinational model, bringing them to the US or Europe, taking those beans from, say, Malaysia, turning them into a single origin chocolate bar and marketing it as a single origin bar. But the manufacturing took place offshore. For me, the value creation was doing manufacturing in the country of origin. So I call that a single origin chocolate bar. We came up with the first dark milk chocolate bar. You've heard of dark chocolate bars, you've heard of milk chocolate bars. I had a combined one because I perceived 19 years ago that Americans who grew up on very sweet chocolate bars, their tastes were maturing and evolving. I saw them liking red wines that were more tannin, a little more bitter, if you will. And all the European chocolates were more bittersweet and dark. So I wanted a transitional bar. I have more than twice the cocoa liquor, which is the essence of the bean, that the FDA says you need to call your chocolate bar a dark chocolate bar. We use twice as much. To our knowledge, it's the darkest milk chocolate in the world. And I brought some for you to try. So we'll try a dark milk chocolate bar. I put a little milk in to soften the flavor, so it's not quite as bitter as your traditional dark chocolate bar. The idea was this is going to be a transitional bar to move us from real sweet chocolate bars to a classic bittersweet or dark chocolate bar. Okay? And then finally, we're the first upscale chocolate bar that's, as I said, manufactured entirely in a country of origin. And we've been able to sustain exports to Japan and the United States and elsewhere. What do we do presently? We make chocolate for eating, and we do hot cocoa drink mixes, which we sell into what I call the specialty coffee trade. Places like Starbucks. We'll talk about some key markets. The specialty coffee industry. Starbucks, who created the specialty coffee industry, is really only about 25% of the market. So I like to tell people 75% of this industry is people you've never heard of. It's your small boutique coffee roasters. Every city has 1, 2, or 3 of them. Craftsmen, artisanal roasters. That's our bread and butter accounts. Interesting for those who are marketing students, people that frequent coffee bars, especially those who frequent coffee bars that may not be a Starbucks, are often very receptive to new ideas and new items and new food products and new brands. Their brand affiliation and their brand association is very loose and fluid. So it's very easy to do customer capture and introduce a new product in that demographic. Okay? Grocery stores we sell to, we do corporate gifts, fundraising, and we're focusing on the high end of the market. We are not the cheapest chocolate bar in the world because, frankly, most retailers don't want another cheap chocolate bar. They have Nestle's, they have Cadbury's, they have Hershey's. All of them battle for shelf space. They pay slotting fees. And at the end of the day, what a retailer wants to do is merchandise. They want to have a product mix. They want to have cheap chocolates, middle-tier chocolates, and upscale chocolates. And together that creates a very robust aisle and robust sales. So that's what we've targeted, what we want to do. Most people say, gee, you must have cheap labor costs. Well, our labor costs might be cheaper than, say, in Switzerland, for example, but we have other costs that are more expensive. So the fact is we can't make a chocolate bar as cheap as we could if we were going to do it offshore. Part of it is because we're artisanal. Part of it is we actually pay some very generous wages. And finally, at the end of the day, it's the end of the market we've chosen to concentrate on, is to do things well and make a very high-quality product. Okay? How do we do it? We combine the value of design. Those of you who know the city of Milwaukee, this is the new art center there. Interesting about this new art center, it's a sort of a one-of-a-kind architectural wonder. There's very little gallery space in this. So isn't it interesting? An art center builds a brand new addition, and it has almost no gallery space. What does it have? It has huge public space, where every weekend there's usually 2 weddings or a wedding and a corporate event under that sort of tent part. It has a huge gift shop. It quadrupled the former gift shop. And it also has a restaurant cafe and a small little gallery space. So we see here the power of design in sort of ancillary income streams. A public space, gift shop, restaurant, and cafe adds value to the cultural mission of an art center. You only have to look at a Macintosh computer, which costs more than most of their competitors, and yet the design and the functionality is so superior that many people will happily pay that premium. Also think of Nike tennis shoes. Tennis shoes should be a tennis shoe, but the design sensibility that Nike brings to a shoe adds value. In fact, I'd argue it adds more value than the technology that Nike invests heavily in terms of traction and tension and viscosity of the heels, that kind of thing. So you've got the technical cell, you've got the design cell, and the design cell often can contribute significant value. So we have value of design, we have value of a story, and I just wanted to share this picture of me and Sunyani 31 years ago. That's, see if you can see me, I'm at the back, and I've got my host father, 3 wives, and all the family. So we combine this. To me, this gives us great authenticity. Okay? Back in 1978, on July 3rd, the day before U.S. Independence Day, we had our own fireworks in Ghana. They had a military coup. The government shifted completely. And so I was in Ghana at a very sort of a momentous time as it was trying to find its way as the first African sub-Saharan country to get its independence from a colonial power. Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast. Today it's called the nation of Ghana. And it's, I think, arguably the strongest democracy on the continent and one of the strongest economies on the continent. Okay? So we combine design, we combine story, our algorithm looks like this, and you get a brand, you get a product. So those are our value propositions that we go to market with. And we think what we do is we're really trying to transform an emerging economy. I wasn't interested, when I went back to Ghana, after living there as a high school student, my motivation was to go with some sort of purpose. And I thought to myself, should I be in the foreign service? Well, the fact is, if I was a diplomat, there's no guarantee I'd ever get sent to Ghana. And even if I did, I'd only rotate there 2 or maybe 3 years. And my own personal experience was working in small businesses, sort of family businesses. And so I thought, is there maybe an entrepreneurial avenue that could bring me back to Ghana? So I looked around. And the 3 main sort of commodities that Ghana was known for was gold, hence its name, the Gold Coast, diamonds, and cocoa. And the other was bauxite, which is the mineral that you make aluminum from. I knew nothing about aluminum smelting. Gold and diamonds were sort of huge, capital-intensive cartels. Little did I know what cocoa would be like. But I knew my way around a kitchen. I was always kind of the person at school who liked to cook and bake cookies and brownies and entertain. So I figured, let me look at the world of cocoa. Let me look at the food sector. And it struck me, why is Ghana selling their cocoa beans for pennies a pound when they could be turning it into chocolate and making dollars a pound. I didn't understand why they had never tried to move up the value chain. The extractive industries, those are what I call oil and gas and gold and diamonds and bauxite. These are things that get taken out of the earth. They're often processed and turned into something very valuable offshore, and they rarely benefit a lot of people in the host country. So the idea of being involved in what I call an extractive industry, this is the bane of a lot of, frankly, African countries. Multinationals come in, they cut a deal to get minerals out. It's often they're complicit with a rather corrupt host government. They get spiffed, and then you see kind of exploitation of people. So I wanted to move away from an extractive industry and move towards a value industry. I didn't want what I thought was beginning to see was a charitable stigma. I became a bit of a reluctant capitalist. I saw what happens if you're donating things. There's almost a sense of superiority by the person that's donating, and it kind of reinforces a poor me attitude on the person that's receiving the aid. And the people I was working with, and the Ghanaians I knew when I was at school who came abroad, were some of the most brilliant people I knew. And I thought the charitable stigma, what I wanted to do was something sustainable, and to me that meant an arm's length, at the end of the day, a business transaction, where we'd pay wages, we'd make investments, and that would be our contribution to the economy. And hopefully open people's eyes up to a new economic model for creating value in countries that historically had been relegated to being suppliers of commodities. So that's what I mean by no charitable stigma, and being culturally sensitive. I have to tell you, when I started this, I was a young lawyer, and I had written a joint venture agreement. It was about an inch or two thick. It was my final exam project. I was so proud of it. I went to Ghana, and I thought, here's how we're going to set this up. People looked at me, and I realized that sort of legal draftsmanship was very off-putting in the Ghanaian context. And so we had to be very culturally sensitive how we set this up and what sort of even corporate entities we use to achieve our ends. So, and that to me is the joy of it. That's what was always interesting, why I liked being in Ghana and living with that sort of very unique and unusual family. It's the cultural sensitivity part. So what we do is we think we go really beyond the fair trade model, which is centered on giving a premium to commodity producers and into a value creation model. Okay, our business model, what we do, we deal with the democratically elected government, which unilaterally tells us how much we pay for cocoa beans. We don't have a choice. We don't bargain with individual farmers. The model in Ghana is vertically integrated. So when I started, the farmers in Ghana are given seed stock from a government agronomy substation, considered the finest cocoa research station in the world. They grow 2 crops a year. A government monopoly at that time bought every bean grown, and they guaranteed each farmer a price. So if the world price went tanked, the farmers still got a price. And if the world price went very high, the government would pay them a bonus. And this year, for example, the government of Ghana has paid 2 bonuses to cocoa farmers. So they have a guaranteed, it's like a fair trade wage guarantee system, okay? And so that's how we do it. People say, do we negotiate with farmers? No, because we weren't allowed to. The government of Ghana, this was the cultural sensitivity, says, if you want to buy beans, you got to go to our bean buying monopoly, and they'll tell you how much you have to pay for the beans. Okay? There's also another government monopoly located in London which does the trading. It's called Cocoa Marketing Company, CMC. So you can see the government grows the stock, gives it to the farmers, buys every bean back from the farmer. That's one monopoly. Another monopoly sells those beans abroad, and another monopoly trucks those beans from farm to port. So the government gets a little touch every step of the way. It employs 43,000 people just in the cocoa bureaucracy. And insofar as the number of farms, there's well over 600,000 cocoa farms, individual cocoa farms. They're family farms. Most are no bigger than this auditorium. It's about what a family can grow. There are no corporate farms. Foreigners can't own land to do cocoa farming. And the interesting thing also is in the cocoa growing region, it's a matrilineal society. So most of us are sort of familiar with the old British or European system where the oldest son would inherit the land. Ghana is a matrilineal society. So land is held by women quite often, and they're the landholders. So you have husbands and men often beholden to their aunts and their grandmothers and their wives and their sisters, because they're the ones that really hold all the value. Very interesting and kind of nuanced cultural vignette about Ghana. All our workers are shareholders in the factory. They're all union members. They receive subsidized housing, free transportation to the factory. They get free meals at a commissary. Not as nice as yours out here, which has all these choices and things, but it's very nice for Ghana. And we have free medical care for all the workers and their families at a clinic that actually has a doctor, an MD on staff, and they get free uniforms. So that's what we do, mainly because it's good insurance for me. I've got to be in a lot of places around the world selling chocolate. I need a happy factory and a productive one. So this model for us, which is different from sort of one where you're looking to site your factory where you have cheap labor. This is not cheap, but we have a very, very productive workforce as a result of it. And that's, for me, building long-term value is the most important thing. Okay? And if you're innovative, this model, you, by definition, should be newsworthy. This is just an example of books that have written about Omanhene. We've been successful enough to attract some top-flight partners. And we just came back last week from New York Restaurant Week. They have something you may have seen, like the Project Runway, where they have Fashion Week. Well, the food business has something called Restaurant Week, and that starts this week. And we were a partner of Diet Coke. They came to showcase what we do with Diet Coke. For us, we're probably the smallest chocolate company in the world. And Diet Coke is the most valuable consumer brand in the world. So you really had this David and Goliath trying to come together around Restaurant Week. It was great fun and a great learning experience and a great privilege for us. And I hope a validation that what we're doing is on the right track. We also were part of the United Nations Global Compact. And we'll talk about that a little later. I'll come back to that. That is a corporate good governance scheme or regime that was established by Kofi Annan about 2001. And one of the partners we have when we sell in Japan, we partner with the Japan National Art Museum. And you may think, well, what does an art museum have to do with chocolate? But in terms of a platform for marketing, again, we felt people that went to art museums were very open-minded, culturally aware, willing to try a new food product. And frankly, we're a food product from Africa. And if you do marketing studies, most people's perception of what Africa is poverty, disease, and civil war. They actually do demographic studies, and they get 100 people, and the top three are poverty, civil war, and disease. So if you're trying to sell a food product that comes from this perceptual reality, very difficult. And that's what we're trying to change, that in fact some superior food products can come from the African continent. The other you might think of as perhaps South African wines. Okay, this is just merely to show you volatility. You have cocoa at one point in this decade selling for $800 a metric ton. Right now it's a little over $3,100, $3,200 it's been this year. So that's a four-fold increase, 400% increase. If you're a country, how do you run where half your revenues come from this volatile commodity? That's your problem. That's your challenge. Okay? The other challenge is when your economy is so closely linked to a commodity, here's what happens. This blue line is the price of cocoa. Okay? And you can see, again, it's volatile. It moves all the time. And the green is the number of tons produced, the gross tonnage. And see what happens here is when the price spikes, all the tropical countries that could grow cocoa say, wow, we ought to put more land under cultivation. Let's capture some of this premium. But it takes a couple years. So what happens, by the time they start producing, they wind up overproducing. What happens to the price? It falls. And when it falls, then you've got all these people not making a living because they're trying to sell cocoa for which there's no market. So this is the vexing problem of a developing country. You never can get supply and demand quite right. Okay? So here's what we do, and this to me is maybe the most important thing. Those of you who are familiar with it, it's the value chain. And when it was first described, they were dealing with coffee. And so we'll talk about coffee, but you can see the parallels to chocolate. The bottom of the value chain is your commodity. It's a raw material. A coffee bean or a cocoa bean in and of itself isn't worth very much. But if you turn that coffee bean into a cup of coffee, it's worth a lot more. So you're moving up the value chain. Now, if you take that cup of coffee, which you'd get at 7-Eleven, but instead of 7-Eleven, you buy it at Starbucks, so you have nice couches and free Wi-Fi and music, you're actually providing a service to a person because you're giving them a nice place to sit and enjoy it. You're giving them the free Wi-Fi. You've created even more value. And if you can sell that cup of coffee at a place like Disneyland, where a person has to pay $65 just to walk in the door and then spend $5 or $6 to get that cup of coffee in Disneyland, that becomes like an $85 cup of coffee. That's your destination. That's your experience port of the value chain. That's where you want to be. So when I went to Ghana, I said, enough with the commodities. We're going to move up the value chain, okay? We're going to try to play way up there. And most movements that are tied to, like the fair trade, tries to get extra pennies, extra value at this end, paying farmers a little more. And for some commodities, like a banana, for example, where you can't add value to it, you don't turn a banana into anything. You just eat a banana. That's maybe the only solution for getting more value for people. So it's got great value in that context. But for something that has to be transformed, like a coffee bean, you're not just going to eat a coffee bean and you're not going to eat a cocoa bean. They have to be transformed. That what I wanted to do was work at this end, work at kind of the service and experience end and the manufacturing end. We're transforming a multiple of dollars as opposed to pennies. Again, this begins to be product intensive. Price of coffee or cocoa, it's susceptible to world price vagaries of commodity price pressure. The product is where the value is created. If you're working at a Starbucks, the value is really created by people. It's people selling that cup of coffee at Starbucks. It's the customer experience you get when you're in a nice place to enjoy your chocolate bar. Okay? So it becomes people intensive. You have to employ people, you have to train them, you have to give them a good customer experience, and that's expensive. You're not exploiting cheap labor at that point. You need trained people. So that's, again, why this model was captivating to me. So let's start at the bottom, just so you see what a cocoa tree looks like. They look like little footballs. I'll just go back to it. Those little footballs, you slice them open. Inside, there's maybe 24 beans. They're seeds, actually. They look like pumpkin seeds. They come out white. They're moist. They're sort of sweet. And you throw away the rest of this. It's actually used for some silage for animals. But you take those 24 beans, you put them out in the sun, and you dry them. What we do in Ghana is one step in between here is we take those raw beans, we put them between banana leaves, and we do what we call ferment them. We flip them right on the forest floor, and you let them sit for 10 days to 2 weeks. And what you're doing is concentrating the sugars, reducing the moisture content, and enhancing the flavor. It's time-consuming, but it gives you a premium bean. In the world of cocoa, there's actually 3 kinds of beans. There's what they call an export grade or a premium bean. There's a commercial grade bean, and then there's a waste grade. And there's actually a use for all 3. But the government of Ghana, many years ago, early 1960s, they said, we're only going to do premium cocoa beans, export grade cocoa beans. So they mandated you have to do this fermentation, you have to do this sun drying, as opposed to putting it in a mechanical roaster. The sun drying takes 2 weeks, and it really improves the flavor. That's why when you trade cocoa futures, you pay several $100s more a metric ton for a Ghanaian bean. It's because of this quality control. So what happens to the beans? Is every bean in Ghana a premium grade? No. Those that became cheaper grade beans that didn't cut the mustard, they wound up getting smuggled to Ivory Coast. So you saw in the early 1960s, Ghana was the largest cocoa producer in the world. Ivory Coast began to grow. Part of it was some internal reasons in Ivory Coast. Some of it was simply substandard Ghanaian beans that went and traded as an Ivory Coast bean. Okay? Excuse me. Let me just pop back here real quick. Okay. This is the quality control staff. This is at our factory. We have a 12-person right now quality control staff. We do all product development in Ghana for chocolate. We run small batches. We do benchmarking, probably 150 different measurements taken in the production process. This is a production supervisor. We did a renovation in about early 1990s, at that time all state-of-the-art. So same equipment that the Swiss and the Belgians use, same equipment that's used at Milwaukee's W.R. Grace, the Ambrosia plant, those of you who are familiar with Milwaukee. We just have a smaller version of everything. We're like a microbrewery in the chocolate world. Again, just so you can see the factory floor and the people that are on it, this is our quality control lab, and what we're actually doing is developing the 80% chocolate bar, which I've got some of those for you to sample as well. This was the development phase where we did bench samples and made up small versions of it. Okay. Moving up the value chain, what do you do with finished chocolate? Say you make a beautiful bar of chocolate. Are you done? I thought no. Good chocolate has to be used by premier pastry chefs to create these beautiful plated desserts. That gets you into the restaurant world. And this, my partner in this is Chef Francois Kwakudongo. He actually grew up in a town very close to Sunyani, right over the border in Cote d'Ivoire, grew up on a cocoa farm, came to this country with nothing in his 20s, worked in New York washing tables and washing dishes at fine restaurants just to make ends meet, and got a break one day when a chef got sick, and he had been watching, so he moved up the line as a salad chef and a prep chef and a sous chef, became discovered and rose to become Wolfgang Puck's executive chef at Spago Restaurant in California during the 90s, when Spago Restaurant was the sort of premier celebrity hangout in Los Angeles. Then he came to Chicago and opened it up. So he has been featured all over. He's now part of Omanhene. So again, this is the value, the assets Omanhene brings are the creativity and the people we've been able to bring around the project. And Francois, a wonderful partner to work with. Okay. One of the visions where we're going, people ask, how do I decide what we're going to do, what kind of new products, what recipes? This is the philosophical part of what I do. And this is historian Yuri Zelskin. And he says modernization is about everyone becoming urban, mobile, literate, articulate, intellectually intricate, physically fastidious, and occupationally flexible. It's about learning how to cultivate people and symbols, not fields or herds. Because people are really what are most valuable. So let's just take one of these. What does it mean when people become urban? People become urban. It means you move to a city. What does that mean? It means space in the city is at a premium and gets expensive. It means you might have grown up on a farm, but now you have a little apartment. It may be very expensive, and you may have to share it with 4 people. And if you live in New York, it may be so expensive you don't even have a kitchen. So it means if you're going to socialize or meet people, you don't do it around the fire. You don't do it in your living room. You go elsewhere. And that's part of the reason we've seen a rise in the cafe and the specialty coffee culture, because of urbanization. And it's true in Accra, Ghana, it's true in Chicago, and it's true in Seattle. Everywhere in the world, this urbanization, which means high costs of living in cities, means people don't have space to meet. So they look for de facto living rooms outside of their home. How can Omanhene play in that space? Okay. The other thing I think about is there's a book, Ray Oldenburg's Great Good Place. He talks about your first place being your home, second place is work, and the third place is a public place. It's the student union. It's where people gather information. It used to be the church or the barber shop. Again, you put this concept of the third place, striving for third place, this public space, with what Yuri Zelskin talks about urbanization and people coming together, and you see people are hungry to tell stories in a place where they can meet in public because they don't have room in their own homes. Okay? Restaurants become destinations. This is a restaurant designer in Chicago we've worked with for our next venture, which is doing cafes and restaurant destination venues that would feature Omanhene chocolate and make use of the assets of a person like the Chef Francois. So people come to a restaurant like this because the food is terrific, but it's also a fanciful, wonderful destination place. The architecture is so wonderful, the art in it. So this is a restaurant as a destination. A cafe becomes an urban living room. The designer we work with designs everything from the boots and the outfit that the wait staff wears to the lights to the tables. The whole ambiance goes into the psychology of how do you entertain people. We talked about being literate and cultivating symbols. You see some of the symbolism very organic in a bar right here. And bars are really interesting places to design when I got sort of put my foot in it because it's very gender specific. I'm going to paint with a broad brush here. Right? When you do kind of demographic studies, most men, their idea of a great bar is a place with a lot of big screen TVs to watch sports. And women want a bar that's places you can talk, that smells nice and looks nice and is much more inviting. And the problem is often in our society, men want to meet women, and they want to meet at a bar. And these bars are mutually exclusive to watch sports and also enjoy a cup of coffee or a coffee drink, an alcoholic drink. So you begin to see what kind of symbols to make a bar like this inviting both to men and women. That's the trick. Okay, intellectually intricate. This was a redo of a restaurant that was an old steakhouse in New York. It was kind of an old white men's cigar-smoking kind of a steakhouse. And this got completely redone. This, again, the value of design. And when they were finished, this restaurant saw its revenues increase 30% just on the design. That's no menu changes. And they took these sort of organic double helixes and made it much more inviting to men and women and older people and young people and more diverse kinds of people. So that's the benefits of being intellectually intricate. All right, so we've seen we have a chocolate, we have combining it with a story, and you get a high-margin group of products. Okay. I just want to visit, before we start a discussion, talk a little bit about the Global Compact. It's one of the ways we try to be a good global corporate citizen. And what we liked about the Global Compact, it seemed to me more comprehensive than other sort of fairness in business regimes, because it looks at 10 different principles: human rights, labor, environment, anti-corruption. You know, anti-corruption is not really a part of paying farmers premiums for their commodities. But this, for us, seemed to be a very, I thought, nuanced way of looking at it. And the expectation is you'll make progress on all 10 principles, but in any given year, you may only be working on 2 or 3 of them. Because in a certain culture, those are the 3 most important of the attributes that you need to address. So we're part of this. It was started by interesting Kofi Annan, the Ghanaian Secretary General, and he ran this out of the Office of the Secretary General. Another way to say this was never approved by the General Assembly, all the countries in the UN, because when he started this, he looked around and he said, I've got 200 member countries. Most of them are so poor they can't afford to have a delegation here at the UN. What I really want to do is get those multinational companies to start to think about issues of globalism and fairness and economic justice, because they're the ones that employ people, and they have the resources, the billions of dollars to maybe make a dent in this. So he's decided to go and talk to the business community, came up with this scheme, which was greeted by most of the member nations as very suspect. It's like, how could you make a deal, quote unquote, with the enemy? But that's what he did. And then at the end of his tenure, really the last week or so that he was in office as Secretary General, the full General Assembly voted to approve this whole program, and it's now an actual official part of it. But for the first 10 years of his existence, the Global Compact was run as a little bit of a clandestine operation out of the Office of the Secretary General, not the General Assembly. Okay, I'm going to pause right here. Let's have a little chocolate. And what I'm going to do is pass out some chocolate. I'm going to need a little help. And hold on to the chocolate bar, and I'm going to take you through a chocolate tasting. So at your next party with friends and colleagues, you can show what a swanky kind of person you are and how to do a chocolate tasting. You probably know wine or beer tastings. Here's how we do chocolate. So we have 2 kinds of chocolate bars. I'm trying to think if there's enough for everybody to have both. This one is our dark milk chocolate bar. As I said, it has a 48 on it. That refers to the cocoa content. And this, to my knowledge, the darkest milk chocolate bar in the world. Okay, so I've got these. This one that's kind of a dark purple and maroon, this is our dark chocolate. This is very bitter, 80%. Those of you who like a really, really dark chocolate, hold out for this. All right, so take it and then don't eat it quite yet, and we'll go through a chocolate tasting together. May I get a little help for this? Here's some of the, why don't I take, you take one of these, and I'll go the other side here if you want to maybe work that side of the house. And while I'm waiting, does anyone have any questions?
Tremendous work that you've done in creating such a success. And I actually what you presented, because this is such a wonderful outside, real world kind of example. And I'm sure that a number of my students have some questions. They're just a little shy at the moment.
They're shy. Well, we'll get some chocolate and open up, but thank you. Terrific. All right, does everyone have a chocolate bar? Not quite yet, no. You don't have a chocolate bar, raise your hand. Back row, okay. How to eat a chocolate bar. First thing I always have people do is read the label. And you should be able to pronounce every ingredient in a chocolate bar. Okay? And in a good chocolate bar, there's really only a handful of ingredients. You have cocoa liquor. Cocoa liquor is the non-alcoholic essence of the cocoa bean. We call it liquor because it's expressed in liquid form when you crush a cocoa bean. And cocoa liquor contains the 300 biochemicals that give cocoa its aphrodisiac quality, its addictive quality. It's got the aroma and the taste. In its pure form, it's dark brown and very, very bitter. That's your liquor. The other thing that is expressed when you crush a cocoa bean is you have a clear liquid that rises to the top. It's a fat. It's called cocoa butter. It's the same cocoa butter you use in the cosmetics industry. But that cocoa butter and the cocoa liquor then get re-put together. And the cocoa butter has no odor. Cocoa butter has no flavor. But it gives you the mouthfeel. It gives you that wonderful smoothness. And the problem, the physics of chocolate is butter and liquor never want to stay together. They always want to separate like oil and vinegar. So the physics of chocolate making is how to get liquor and butter to stay together. So you got liquor, you have butter, you have sugar, and you use like 0.5% or 0.2% of soy lecithin, which is actually like molasses. It's an emulsifier and all natural to try to keep the liquor and butter together. If you've ever had a chocolate bar, you left it in a window or put it in the refrigerator and you get that white powder on it. It's what they call bloom. It's simply the cocoa butter separating and rising to the surface of the bar. Won't kill you, it just doesn't look so appetizing. So you should only see cocoa liquor, butter, sugar, a little lecithin, and milk if you use a milk chocolate recipe. So that's all there is. The other thing, if you'll notice, it'll say made in Ghana. This is made entirely in the country of origin. It's got to say that on it. All right, so open up your chocolate bar and hold it between your thumb and forefinger, like this. Really, go home Thanksgiving, you're going to just wow your parents how you do this. It's wonderful. Okay? And you address the bar. Hello, bar. And you snap it. What you're listening for is a nice, clean snap. Let me snap it by my here. Did you hear that? And you like a nice, clean break. A good chocolate shouldn't crumble. It should be nice and then you smell along that fault line. And it should smell like chocolate. It shouldn't smell like chemicals. It shouldn't have a lack of odor. Some chocolate bars, when I do tastings, there's just no odor. That's not a good thing. The other thing is, if it's melting in your hand, that's a good thing. Good chocolate melts at body temperature. Okay? Take a bite, hold it on your tongue, and push it against the roof of your mouth. And what you want is those sharp corners to begin to soften. From there on, just swallow it, enjoy it, and it's subjective. Whether you like the flavor or not, that's all a personal choice. Now, what you may notice after you swallow the chocolate is a little fruity aftertaste, like a raspberry or a currant, and that comes from a really, really fresh bean. Remember I said we don't fumigate our beans, put them in the hold of a ship and take them offshore. That freshness, that kind of fruity bounce, we use no artificial flavors or ingredients or colors. It comes from that fresh bean. So that's a good chocolate bar. It means good chocolate, as I said, melts in your hand. Some countries in the European Union, for example, wanted to substitute 10% of the cocoa butter in a chocolate bar and use animal fat or vegetable fat and still call it a chocolate bar. Why would they do that? Because it's expensive. If they could use a substitute ingredient for 10% of the chocolate bar, they could make a cheaper chocolate bar. And of course, all the cocoa growing countries in the southern hemisphere said, no, 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 no. If you're going to call that finished product a chocolate bar, it's got to have cocoa butter and cocoa liquor, and cocoa butter is the only fat you can use. So here's how you have trade wars starting. Anyway, enjoy the chocolate. This is, as I said, chocolate should be indulged. It's a wonderful thing to enjoy in moderation. Moderation for me is like 12 times a day. So thank you for attention. I've got some other things we can talk about if you want to talk about the fair trade, free trade. We can, but let's pause for a minute and have some questions. And no question is off limits. So please feel free.